Hey, welcome. So today we're going to dive into the life of a guy who might just completely flip your idea of what a saint looks like. We're talking about someone who found holiness not by, running away from the world, but by climbing its mountains and jumping right into all its joys.
And this was his personal motto, his catchphrase, Verso alto. It's Italian for to the heights. And honestly, that little phrase defined his entire approach to life, from scaling actual mountains to serving the poor. It's really the thread that ties his whole story together.
So, let's start with a little thought experiment. When you picture a saint, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For most of us, it's probably someone really quiet, super solemn, maybe a little disconnected from everyday life. But what if? What if their life was actually packed with laughter, with practical jokes, and with these incredible, thrilling adventures?
Well, that's Pier Giorgio Frassati in a nutshell. And that's exactly why people see him as a different kind of hero. He totally shatters the mold, and he gives us a picture of holiness that feels, incredibly modern and doable. Let's really get into just how different he was.
Okay, so on one hand, you have that traditional image, right? Solemn, maybe a little withdrawn, focused almost entirely on prayer. But Frassati, he was the polar opposite. He was joyful and social, adventurous and fun-loving, and his faith was all about action. His life basically screams that a deep faith isn't about hiding from the world, but about diving into it, head first.
So where did this guy even come from? Well, his backstory might surprise you. His path was, to put it mildly, pretty unexpected. So Pier Giorgio was born in Italy, 1901, into this really wealthy, powerful family. And here's the kicker, they weren't particularly religious at all. So you can just imagine his parents' surprise when from a really young age, he develops this incredibly deep, personal faith. And as he got older, he made a very conscious choice to just turn his back on the life of privilege he was born into.
And we're not talking about small gestures here. He really, truly lived a simple life, sharing absolutely everything he had. There are all these stories about him giving away his bus fare to someone who needed it more, and then just running home instead. For him, faith was never just some idea in his head. It was always this radical, constant, on-the-ground action.
And this really gets us to the heart of his philosophy. This whole idea that can be summed up in one just fantastic Italian word.
Gusto. It means zest or passion. It's about living life to the absolute fullest. Frassati was convinced that God wants us to have this wonderful, abundant life, and he poured that gusto into everything, and I mean everything he did.
And you could see this passion pop up in every part of his life. You could almost say his personality had these three amazing connected sides. He was the activist, he was the adventurer, and, you're gonna love this, he was what his friends called a terror. So first up, the activist. The poor and the sick, they had this special place in his heart. He was always fighting for social justice, and you could always find him in the city's slums, taking care of the sick and serving people that society had basically forgotten.
Then, you've got the adventurer. The man absolutely loved the outdoors. He was constantly getting his friends together to go climb mountains, always pushing to get higher. And for him, this wasn't just a hobby, It was a physical way of showing his spiritual desire to reach for God.
And then there was his very, very human side. His friends actually nicknamed him the Terror because he was a huge practical joker. He was the life of the party, always encouraging people, always having fun. It's just such a great reminder that holiness and a good sense of humor can absolutely go hand in hand.
But his life, which was so full of passion and purpose, was cut tragically short. And this brings us to his final summit.
He was just 24, that's it. A life packed with so much adventure and service and joy, all squeezed into just 2.5 decades.
And the irony of how he died is it's heartbreaking. He contracted polio, and he got it directly from one of the sick people he was caring for in the slums. His final act of service was the very thing that led to his sudden death.
At his funeral, something absolutely incredible happened. His very prominent, wealthy family expected a pretty standard service. But instead, the streets were lined with hundreds and hundreds of people from the poorest parts of the city. It was really only then that his family began to understand the sheer scale of his secret life. The very people he had served, day in and day out, all came to honor the man who had loved them so much.
So what does a life like that, lived so fully but for such a short time, leave us with? What's his legacy for us today?
I think this idea sums it up perfectly. Frassati's life wasn't about choosing between God and the world. No way.
It was about being so completely immersed in God that a deep love for everything else, for people, for adventure, for life itself, just naturally poured out of him.
You know, in the end, his story kind of leaves us with a blueprint for a full life. It shows us that faith and fun are not opposites, not at all. That serving other people brings us incredible, deep joy. He proved that a life that's truly lived is one that's always reaching to the heights.
And that really just leaves us with one final question. Pier Giorgio Frassati found his mountains to climb, both the literal ones and the metaphorical ones. His story challenges every single one of us to look at our own lives and ask a simple question. What heights are you called to climb?
To the heights, into God's light.